Howdy, howdy, hi, lads, lasses, and non-binary asses, I'm Small Sketch, and this is a video on Tourette's. It's something that I have, and something you probably thought was just shouting swears at one point, and that's okay! Maybe you still think that, but I'm here to shed some light on the disorder through this video, which is somewhat of an updated version to an infographic that I made over on Tumblr back in 2019 that blew up somehow. Since then, I've learned a lot more about my own tics and Tourette's in general, which I finally got a competent neurologist to teach me about, but I'll get to that. This video will be divided up into 3 parts: the facts, my experiences, and then finally what to take away from this for both people with tics and without them. Starting with the facts, we can begin with the Mayo Clinic's definition of Tourette syndrome, which is defined as, quote, a disorder that involves repetitive movements or unwanted sounds, tics, that can't be easily controlled. These tics are usually developed between ages 2 and 15, and last through adulthood while lessening with age. In order to be classified as Tourette syndrome, a person needs to have at least 2 motor tics and at least 1 vocal tic that have been present for an extended period of time. The version of Tourette's that is often joked about, where somebody will swear uncontrollably, is known as coprolalia, which only affects about 1 in 10 people with Tourette's, so by no means the majority. Another version of Tourette's, echolalia, is a version where people will repeat sounds or phrases that they've heard around them. People with Tourette's will often have their tics change over time. This happens subconsciously and is by no means something that the person has control over. Some people can pick up tics easier than others as well, which is why it isn't a very good idea to have a camp full of kids with Tourette syndrome, but that's just my opinion. Sounds like hell. As for what tics feel like or what might trigger them, think of like that feeling right before you get a sneeze. You can feel it coming on and can't just decide to turn it off. That's the best way I can describe it, or like an itch that you really, really have to scratch, and you can maybe ignore it for a little bit, but eventually you're gonna have to scratch that itch. Anxiety or an excess of adrenaline can also make tics come on more frequently or in bigger bursts, which means caffeine is a big no-no for people with Tourette's. Do I still occasionally screw myself over by chugging a mocha? Next question! You may be wondering, is there anything that can stop the tics, like a medication or treatment? Not exactly. There are medicines that can be used for people with Tourette's that are also used for people with ADHD that can calm down the tics and make them become less frequent, but they don't just shut them off entirely. As for other treatment options, there's always occupational therapy, which doesn't work to get rid of your tics, rather to help you live with them and cope with them and better control them in public. I highly recommend it. It's not actually that bad. I was really worried they were gonna put me in a straitjacket or something and make me stop ticking, which sounds like actual hell along with that camp I mentioned. But it's not like that at all. It's very wonderful, and if you have tics, I highly recommend it, like I said. Now, with the facts out of the way, I feel like sharing my own experiences may help those better understand what this all means applied to somebody's life. I've had Tourette's for as long as I can remember, and that means that, oh boy, it used to be so much worse when I was a little kid. When I was little, I had far more tics to deal with. My family had no idea what it could possibly be. They didn't know Tourette syndrome was even a thing. They always just dealt with things as they came, whether that meant just accepting their child jumped backwards every 3 steps she took, threw her head back constantly, and even accidentally punched a kid in the face and gave him a bloody nose, just to name a few examples, of course. So they were just as oblivious as me. I always just referred to them as my habits, which was the easiest way for me to understand what I was experiencing. That is, until I saw the movie Wreck-It Ralph. This movie depicted my favorite character to this day, Vanellope von Schweetz, a little girl who can't help that she glitches and doesn't let that stop her from racing. I no longer saw my tics as these weird habits that set me apart from other kids. They were now my own glitches that I could relate to my favorite character with. I felt this was an important note to mention, especially since when we're younger, neurological disorders can feel like such a giant boundary between different groups of little kids, especially because the kids don't know what's going on. They don't understand why Susie is different over in the corner, and not wanting to touch paper without crying. Susie is me, by the way. My name is not Susie, but that was the example. And whether it was intentional in her character or not, I would like to believe that I wasn't the only kid who was comforted by Vanellope's glitches. Getting older and getting an actual neurologist in the 6th grade, it became way more clear to me that I did in fact have Tourette syndrome and not just some strange habits of mine that was just a weird Jeanette thing. However, It wasn't that clear and cut to the neurologist I had, because she often told me I didn't have Tourette's syndrome and wouldn't acknowledge any of the sensory issues I mentioned. Like I said earlier in the video in that little Susie joke, I can't touch paper without feeling like the physical equivalent of the sound nails on a chalkboard makes. I don't know what it is, it's the texture of it, it's just a sensory thing, and that's completely normal. And in fact, is very often connected with Tourette's syndrome. Kids with Tourette's are more likely to have things like ADHD and all these sensory issues, but my neurologist at the time would not acknowledge any of it. This resulted in me feeling like I couldn't trust my own body because I didn't know what was going on, apparently, because surely the neurologist was right. No, she wasn't, because this resulted in me doing weeks and weeks of my own research and compiling a list of all the things my neurologist overlooked that I wanted to bring up with her and call her out. And when I did, do you know what she said to me? What she did when I told her I was completely positive that I had Tourette's and that I fell into the categories that they said had to be checked off for kids with Tourette's? She pat her desk and looked me in the eye and told me it didn't actually matter what she wrote down in my file. Needless to say, I have a new neurologist now, who I have told all of this to and says that was incredibly unprofessional and just blatantly wrong of my previous neurologist. Who would have guessed? I actually spoke about my experiences on Tumblr a little bit with, dealing with professional negligence, and I found that quite a few, or a lot of people online with Tourette's had very similar experiences. Doctors not listening to them and not giving the patients basic information that they should be required to know. The things I mentioned earlier, like how caffeine makes your tics worse and how you can pick up tics from other people sometimes without meaning to, I learned all of this on my own. First-hand experiences. Me drinking caffeine, realizing it connected with tics, doing research, figuring out it did directly connect to the tics. Me watching a Disney Channel short about a kid with Tourette's who rolled his stomach, and then me rolling my stomach for the next 6 months uncontrollably. I had no idea that this sort of stuff could happen, and I feel like it's basic information that they should have told me. But I didn't have Tourette's, according to the doctor. That got a little heavy, but now that we've got that professional negligence out of the way and my first-hand experience with the poor health system, I suppose, poor information being spread around, or rather not spread around, I'd like to move on to what the viewer can take away from this video. For those of you who are watching this who don't have tics, I truly hope that you learned something new from all this info and maybe realize that Tourette's is more than just a one-off joke about swearing in a public place for laughs. Hopefully in the future when you notice someone ticking, it won't be so strange to you now. If you have friends who tic or meet somebody in the future who does, you'll see that there's no need to single them out or make any comments about it. I've actually been told by my friends that they don't even notice when I tic anymore because they're so used to them. And that's a very comforting thing to hear, since sometimes I still do fear that I can be annoying to my friends and others. But that's just my own head getting in the way of things. As for those of you watching this who do tic, I want you all to know that your existence is not a joke. It doesn't matter if you have coprolalia, echolalia, or any range of tics at all. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It took me ages to find a place in the neurodivergent community and really understand how to feel better about these sorts of things that I dealt with every day. So I know firsthand how stressful it can be. But there's so many people to meet and find support in that I promise there's others out there that have gone through everything that you have and will lift you up when you need somebody to relate to and really understand what it's like. You're not alone in this. Anyways, thank you so much if you made it all the way to the end of this video. I hope you have a wonderful day and or night, and I'm Small Sketch, and thank you so much for watching!